It's Monday, January 6th. Welcome into a fresh week of Daily Faceoff Live. As always, the show is presented by Bet365. Download the app, use the promo code NATION, whatever the moment. It's never ordinary at Bet365. My picks of the day coming up in a little bit. Arpon Basu in about 10-15 minutes time to talk about the surging Montreal Canadiens. I'm Tyler Yaremchuk. He is Frank Saravalli, and Frank, south of the border, a golden Monday for hockey fans.
No, it's a white Monday. It's snowy here. Snow day for the kids. I know it's an embarrassingly small amount of snow in order for school to be canceled. I know you're, as an Edmonton native, you're like, what's a snow day? I don't understand the concept of this, but yeah, such is life. Kids are hanging at home, a little video game action today, perhaps playing outside. And yeah, the rest of the country, if they were aware, USA back-to-back gold medals at the World Juniors.
Well, let's start there. It's a gold in Ottawa for the USA, beating Finland in the final, a game that was, peak World Juniors. 3-1 Finland early on. USA's on their heels, and then they turn on the Jets at one point from when it was 3-1 Finland to when that game was tied up. USA went on a run of outshooting them 15-4. The play was just all in Finland's end, especially in the third period. And there were a couple of looks late. Don't take that as Trey Augustine didn't have to make many big saves. He did. There was one with about 3 minutes left in tight. That was remarkable. But it goes to overtime, and Teddy Stiga, on not just his first goal of the tournament, his first shot on goal of the tournament, does this. Roll the tape.
Kansas. And you will have no commercial breaks. Here's a flip ahead. Here comes a chance for Stiga. He's in. He scores! Teddy Stiga! His first goal of the tournament! And it comes at a perfect time!
Frank Freebird playing in the background as Teddy Stiga slides down the ice. It doesn't get any better than that.
Yeah, it's what a moment. I mean, what a moment for USA hockey in general, because I had someone reach out to me last night and say, hey, can't believe that's the first time someone prominent in hockey media, can't believe that's the first time that the US has won back-to-back World Junior gold medals. Can't believe it took this long. And I was like, did you know that the US didn't win a gold medal at all the way until 2004 in this tournament? Since then, in the last 21 tournaments, the U.S. has won gold 7 times, now back-to-back. They've won 3 in the last 5 years. They've been as hot as any federation, any country in this tournament over the last while, and they have staying power. They're obviously not going anywhere. So massive moment for the country as a whole in terms of the hockey playing population. I wish it just got more broad love. Like, that should be a topic on SportsCenter. It should be something that's talked about, but it's so far down with everything else going on that it barely registers a blip here. And meanwhile, in Canada, for like 3 days in a row, they were trotting out top executives from a quarterfinal, back-to-back quarterfinal loss, that they're trying to solve all of the country's problems. So, the heat gets turned up in such a significant way that Justin Trudeau announced his resignation today. I mean, it's been one thing after the other, and the U.S. celebrating today hockey supremacy at the under 20 level.
You stole my joke, damn it. Listen, the World Juniors and Ewan Gregor dropped a new episode of the DFO Rundown this morning, and you talked about how, there's a lot of overreactions prospect-wise that come out of this tournament. But on that note, Frank, is there any front office in the league who's maybe puffing out their chest more than the Washington Capitals this morning on the heels of the World Juniors? I mean, from Ryan Leonard on down, that's a prospect pool that looks legit.
It does. And look, Ryan Leonard, unbelievable, great tournament. I'd say one, you could certainly give some love to the Minnesota Wild. And this is my hot take that I mentioned on the DFO Rundown today. I love that Cole Hudson, another Washington Capitals prospect, and you could talk about the guys that didn't make it, Andrew Crystal, that should have for Team Canada. They all, like, the guys that did play were excellent. Peter Sikora as well on the back end. Look, that said, to me, and for my money, Zeev Buium was the best player in the tournament. And I don't think it was even particularly close, setting up the game tying and game winning goals in the gold medal game. The consistency of play, the way he controlled play, I think he's the steal of the draft. And I think a lot of teams are going to rue letting him slip through their fingers last year in Vegas.
Yeah, and it was a big topic at the draft that he was following. And I don't know if it's just because his name stands out or if it's because he's so big, but in the last 15 minutes of that game, it felt like every 30 seconds it was like Booyam with the puck, Booyam with the puck. Like he was controlling the pace of that game. And I mean, for you to say best D-man in the tournament
No. Best player in the tournament.
best player in the tournament, and you look at some of the other D-men, like you said, Cole Hudson, 11 points. That is a record for an American defenseman.
That's a record for no defenseman has ever led the World Juniors in scoring singularly before.
Yeah, and another guy, how about Axel Sandin Pellikka winning defenseman of the tournament back-to-back years, Frank? That hasn't happened in like 50 years. So the crop of defensemen was unbelievable. And for Booyam to stand out, I mean, no doubt, you look at that Minnesota blue line. I mean, we're, 3-4 years away from sitting here going, Faber, Juracek, Booyam? That's pretty dangerous.
Yeah, it's looking pretty good in Minnesota and looking pretty good in Washington as well. And the other thing is, and we talked about this on the pod as well, it's overreaction season. You know, we're going to hear whether it's about Canada's failures or whether it's about the U.S. successes. World Juniors is great theater and it's unbelievable hockey to watch. There's a purity to it that you don't get anywhere else in the game, with the energy and the mistakes made and the compete, all those things. It's all bottled into one, and it's a great time of year to watch it. But too many people want to make too many bold judgments on the other end of this tournament about what players are and aren't. It's a 1 week, 10-day run in a long season. Don't judge too early.
Yeah, that is totally fair. And now on the international calendar, the next stop, the Four Nations Faceoff in just over a month out in Montreal and Boston. But that's an entirely different conversation. Frank, there was another headline yesterday in the hockey world that had people buzzing, and it was the Frank Vatrano extension out in Anaheim. First off, the announcement video. His daughter's sitting on his lap, and he's talking about the culture, how he wants to be a mainstay in Anaheim and how focused that group is on bringing a Stanley Cup back to Orange County. But the details of this contract, also a big part of it. And it's unique with the deferred money, Ohtani style, if you wanted to call it, or in the NHL, Seth Jarvis style. He would be the one that kind of set the tone with that a few months ago. But it's a unique extension in the sense that it's 3 years, $18 million. But there's $9 million of this deal that's deferred to a 10-year stretch in 2035. For the Ducks, this brings the AAV down to $4.57 million. Frank, what do you make of this deal from both Anaheim's perspective and also the players' perspective?
Well, I love it for Anaheim's perspective because Frank Vatrano had an unbelievable season last year, and you're getting him for the next 3 seasons to follow, taking him off my trade targets board at what comes out to be a $4.57 million a year cap hit. So he has a 30-goal year and doesn't make a full $1 million raise off of what he was previously earning. That's tidy business. Then you factor in the money here and the way this is all going to work out with the deferred payment. And I think it's incredibly one-sided toward Anaheim's direction. Look, I'm sure that Frank Vatrano went into this with the best advisors and certainly was prepped and prompted on all the different parts of this contract and the way that it's structured. I think you have to take the Seth Jarvis deal and some of the other deferred money transactions, Jake McCabe, and put those aside because this one's so totally different. For one, the time period involved in which Frank Vatrano won't see any of this money, it's basically 20 years from when this contract begins to see the last dollars of it. And second, it's an important thing to point out with the deferred money that there is no interest accruing. It's not like you take the $900,000 per year that he's going to get 10 years from now in 2035 and start running the counter on 5.414% interest, which is what was calculated in this deal. No, he's taking it at the end result is $900,000 per year. So I don't love this from the player's perspective. And the other factor is because he's doing it in a state where Shohei Ohtani just made such a bold statement with hundreds of millions of dollars in deferred money that my guess, and just a pure guess, is that the California tax code is going to change. They're going to come back retroactively and say to him, say to Shohei Ohtani and others, hey, you earned this money while living and playing in our state. Therefore, that money is subject to tax, whether it's paid later or not. It was all under contract and consummated while you were a member of a California-based team. you need to pay as if you lived here that whole time. So we don't have clarity on that yet. And it's such a long period of time. I think this contract misses the boat on a number of different fronts for Frank Vatrano. And look, maybe his lifestyle is so totally different. Maybe he's one of those guys that's a spender, and the $900,000 a year coming in as income starting in 2035, it'll be beneficial for the way he lives his life. But had he just taken that money up front in the first 3 years of the deal and invested it, or even bought annuities or whatever it is that you wanted to do with it, the money would grow and compound over that period of time, 2 decades, to be way more than what you're going to get in the end. And so I just don't really understand the incentive to sign the deal either. You take yourself off the market and give yourself less than $1 million a year raise off of AAV that you're making. I'm not seeing it.
Yeah, and like Brian kind of says, good retirement fund on a career that can be uncertain the older you get. But again, if you make that money in the next 3 years versus waiting 10 to 20 years to get it, it can grow and be worth more. Inflation's not factored into this. It's going to be worth less. Like, again, I'm not smart. I'm not great with money, but I can look at this and understand the logic behind why you wouldn't want to do this.
Compound interest is one of the most powerful tools available to anyone. So I'm sure they understand that, and I'm sure he got sound advice. I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying I don't get it, and I would never consider it.
Mm-hmm.
And that said, and I'm a big proponent of deferred money for some other players. I think different situations require different things. But if you're Leon Draisaitl and you've already put $100 million in the bank, of course you can take deferred money. That's not going to change your life significantly. But this is a totally different story.
Yeah, totally. Let's stay in the NHL, Frank, and play a little overreaction game here on a Monday. I got 3 takes for you, and you're going to tell me on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being you are insane, that is never going to happen, 1 being no, I think you're spitting facts, Tyler. You're going to tell me how big of an overreaction it is. And speaking of Vatrano, let's talk about the Anaheim Ducks, who are on a nice run, 7-3 in their last 10. The Ducks will stay in the playoff hunt for the rest of the year. 1 to 10, where are you at?
8. I think it's a pretty general overreaction. I think this team has played a lot better since Jacob Trouba arrived. That seems to be the departure for this team's season. I think they were probably due some of that, and I'm interested to talk to Arpon Basu about that with the Montreal Canadiens as well. It seems like they progressed to the mean after a really tough start to the year. But look, I think this Anaheim team has some talented pieces. I think it's missing a lot. I think they ask a lot of some guys. And I also think that there's been a healthy amount of friction between players and coach that I thought that's why that Vatrano video seemed to be so pointed in terms of trying to do something a little bit differently there.
Let's go from, I guess you call it the middle of the Pacific to the top for my next one. 57 points on the year for the Golden Knights. They are number 1 in the standings, not just the division, not just the conference, but the league. I'm going to say the Vegas Golden Knights are the best team in the NHL, and they should be Stanley Cup favorites. 1 to 10, where you at?
I'm going to say that's a 2. It's pretty close to spot on. I don't know that they should be far and away Stanley Cup favorites because one of the other favorites is in their division and theoretically will be in their bracket in the Edmonton Oilers. It would be an unreal playoff matchup, but I don't know why so many people seem to be sleeping on the Golden Knights this year. I don't know if it's fatigue from a team that's just kind of been in the mix, but there isn't really anything that they're bad at. They've got 17 wins and 21 tries in the Fortress on home ice, been an incredible advantage. I think they're the last team without double-digit regulation losses this year. They've been consistent. There hasn't been a blip. They're 8-2 in their last 10, and I think they're a team that, you know, for whatever reason, I just don't know why they don't get enough love. That back end can compete with anyone.
Yeah, I'm with you. A 731 points percentage is Southpaw puts in our YouTube chat, and only one other team in the entire league is even above 700. It's pretty ridiculous what the Golden Knights have been putting together. Last one for you as we turn our attention out east. A lot of talk about Austin Matthews and his injuries. Frank, I will say the Toronto Maple Leafs should use NBA-style load management on Austin Matthews. No back-to-backs, no more than 3 games in a week to keep him 100% healthy in the back half of the season. What do you say?
10. Gross overreaction. This isn't the NBA. That's why people hate the NBA. I mean, just look in my city alone with Joel Embiid. It's an absolute disaster. And by the way, Austin Matthews is coming off of back-to-back games this weekend, and this is the best that he's looked in months. So I would say that should not be any course of action, although certainly monitor it. And if you need a night off here or there, maybe once or twice over the last half of the season, but that's anything more than that is pushing it.
Yeah, Mechanicsville 10 don't ever want to hear about load management in the NHL. And listen, I am with you, but I had to ask the question. Before we get to Arpon Basu, I know we're running a little bit behind. Let's quickly turn our attention to that Eastern playoff race, Frank, where things are starting to get a little bit interesting. Yes, we'll talk about the Canadiens in a second. And also, this is the topic of our Dominion Lending Center's poll question, which you can have your say on right now in the YouTube. But the Red Wings, red hot since Todd McClellan comes in. It's coupled with the Bolts slipping. Even the New Jersey Devils have lost 4 in a row, although their spot seems a bit more secure. But when you look at the struggles, I guess specifically in Tampa and Boston and some other teams heating up, is there anyone who you're looking at and maybe not overreacting, but reacting strongly to their recent play?
Yeah, it's actually the Ottawa Senators. And as good as the Wings have been under Todd McClellan, and they feel like they've gotten a breath of fresh air. They found themselves again. They've been way better. I'm just not a believer in that defense core, and I don't know that there's any surgery that Steve Yzerman can do in season that will be enough to convince me. But the fact that the Sens have survived this World Junior long road trip, which has been a trip from hell, they can get out of it with a winning record with their last game. I think it's also against Detroit. And they can do all of this with Linus Ullmark still being weeks away, week to week. And an update, according to Travis Green, is that he's not skating yet. To me, the door has been left wide open by the New York Rangers falling out, and the Ottawa Senators should be the big recipient of it. We'll see if they can come through.
Let's stay in the Eastern Conference for today's big segment. It's the All 32, and it's brought to you by Charm Diamond Centers, where you can get a custom ring built and delivered in less than 4 weeks with the Charm Masterpiece program. It all comes with their unbeatable pricing policy. For more information, go to charmdiamondcenters.com. Always a pleasure to welcome Arpon Basu to the program, senior columnist with The Athletic, covering the Montreal Canadiens. And when you look at this little hot streak that the Habs have put together, I know Jakub Dobis is getting a lot of the headlines, but there's got to be more than goaltending going right here, right? Like what's fueling this run for the Habs?
It's just like a general way to play. It's an identity that I think they've formed. There's been some serious dips over the course of the season in terms of like specific areas of their game, but it all seems to have kind of come together. And it's not just like, yes, they are on a pretty good hot streak right now, but you look at them since November 11th, like they lost a game 4-1 in Toronto on Hockey Night in Canada and looked pretty distraught. Marty St. Louis coming out and seeming like a guy who didn't have answers. It was kind of like the nadir of his coaching tenure here in Montreal, like a far cry from the guy who came out on stage at the draft to a standing ovation in Montreal. A lot of questions about him, his defensive system, his ability to coach, frankly. He did come from Pee Wee hockey straight to the NHL, so a lot of people had doubts about that, and I think those started creeping up around that time. 2 days later, on the afternoon of Hall of Fame induction weekend, the Canadiens beat the Sabres in Buffalo 7-5, a super sloppy, just not a professional hockey game by any stretch, but they won that game. Since then, and we're talking like a 24 game sample, I think, if I'm not mistaken. 24 games. They're playing 604 hockey since then. And that's a big stretch. That's more than a quarter of a season. So yes, there's been some blowout losses in that span, and there's been some learning to do, but you can't just wipe away a 24 game sample. And of late, I think it's really come together for them. And you mentioned that killer road trip for the Senators while the World Juniors are going on. The Canadiens do that pretty much every year. Their building is booked between just before Christmas and just after New Year's. They're on the road every year, and that road trip is always a killer. This year they went through, they played in Columbus before Christmas, came back for Christmas, then they went Florida, Tampa, Vegas, Chicago, Denver. 2 of those games were back-to-back, including the Chicago-Denver game. They come out of that losing only to the Blackhawks, funnily enough. They beat the 4 last Stanley Cup champions on their home ice. So pretty statement type of trip for them. There's going to be other dips with this team, but it's not any one thing that's driving it. Their bottom 6 has been phenomenal. It's not their superstar guys. It's not outrageous goaltending. They've had good goaltending, but it hasn't been superlative. And you didn't get the sense in any of those games really that they goalied the other team. So pretty promising for the future. I would fall short on saying that this means that they're a playoff team or whatever, but they have played themselves into the mix, which was literally the corporate messaging the Canadiens sent out before the season started.
Yeah, you're right. That was the whole goal for this season, was just to be playing meaningful games in March. So
Yeah.
are you a believer with the strides that you've seen, given that the sample size has been pretty big? Will this team be in the mix?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things here. I mean, the Canadiens have been ridiculously healthy, especially compared to past seasons. You know, they've had horrible injury luck ever since this administration came in. This year, that has not been the case, other than Patrick Laine going down in the preseason, and that's another kind of departure point you can go from. I mean, on December 7th, he came back. The power play instantly becomes lethal. But so injuries are going to happen. Things are going to happen. Guys are going to hit slumps. You know, Juraj Slafkovsky's still not playing at the level we saw him at last season. Kirby Dach's just coming out of a season-long funk. Like, that's kind of, in some ways, a cautionary tale in terms of the Canadiens, but in other ways, an encouraging sign. You know, like, they've done this with some of the key sort of preseason question marks remaining question marks. So can they be in the mix? Yeah, I think they could stay in the playoff mix. And let's be honest, the Eastern Conference is making it easy to be in the mix. Like, there's not a lot of people pulling away from the pack here. So, but you know, they don't need to play at a ridiculous level to remain in the mix if the rest of the conference remains this way. But the actual way that they're playing, the identity that they've formed, I think is repeatable and sustainable with the personnel that they have. So, yeah, I think they could stay in there, and it's going to create a bit of a dilemma come trade deadline if they do that.
It's funny because it doesn't create a dilemma for me, because I think the plan is the plan, right? Like, and you've got to stick to it, and whatever that means, whether it's potentially saying goodbye to Mike Matheson. I mean, David Savard should be a non-starter. If someone's calling you to take him, you're trading him. But
it depends on the return, Frank. Honestly, like, I mean, you look at Montreal's war chest of picks, war chest of prospects. If you're getting a 4th round pick for David Savard, and it sends a message to the room that we're waving the right flag, there is some value to telling your room that, hey,
yeah,
you've earned
I would
right.
agree. Yeah, that's different. But like, if someone's giving you something of that you feel is actual value, then yeah, I mean, David Savard, you have to.
And the Alex Carrier trade makes that much easier to do, right?
Right, and I think also in that exact moment in time helped prop up this team that they probably needed that support piece at that exact moment in time. It's not all that different than the trade that the Utah Hockey Club made for Olli Maatta. It wasn't a huge headline generator, but it, in the day-to-day, game-to-game, it really helps what you're trying to accomplish. So my question would be, thinking 30,000 foot view, which you're so good at, is the temperature, has it cooled significantly? Because had this team been far out of the mix, had, you know, the heat continued to be turned up on Marty St. Louis as coach, all of a sudden we'd be coming out of the season asking entirely different questions. A market that has remained incredibly patient through this rebuild process, you know, we have been talking about a different story had things continue to go sideways.
Well, let's be honest. Like, I mean, you know, I was talking about it for weeks. Like, the Canadiens need to bank points ahead of this trip because it looked treacherous, right? I mean, can you reasonably expect this team to come out of the trip I just mentioned with 8 out of 10 points? And the only 2 points you lost were in Chicago, for crying out loud. I mean, it's really not logical, but the predictable outcome of that trip would have meant that they would have come back into a hornet's nest for sure. I mean, you know, the heat was getting cranked up. And so what this has done, it's created belief, or I guess rekindled belief in the market, because I think there was some doubt creeping into the Canadiens' overall plan, how they were going to get to a competitive level. You know, it's interesting that coincidentally over the course of this stretch, Ivan Demidov has caught fire in Russia, is like probably the most dangerous forward on his team right now, whereas he was getting, you know, 5-6 minutes a game for the bulk of the season. Now he's lighting it up. I think he's on a 6 or 7 game goal scoring streak right now and playing 15 to 18 minutes a night.
And Canadiens management was unfairly torched for going to visit him.
Yes, that became a political hot potato. Well, you know, I mean, I guess there's from an outside perspective, I suppose you could make the argument that you shouldn't be sort of, because, there was a lot of propaganda, like Scott took that
Sure.
visit and used it. I mean, there's like a 28-minute video on YouTube from Scott St. Petersburg describing that visit as some sort of endorsement of their program. That is not probably what Canadiens management signed up for, but they wanted to. It was important to them to go over there and see him, make sure he was okay, and tell him, reinforce how much of a part of their plan he is. And he just took off from that point onward. So I guess mission accomplished. But to answer your question, yeah, there's definitely a different view of that. Like the Canadiens left for this trip with a lot of people wondering if this season was just going to be a waste, and now there's a definite sense going into tonight's game against Vancouver, which is a team that's obviously reeling a little bit right now, that they're almost in a better place than their opponent tonight. I mean, obviously the first game back after a long road trip, everyone knows about the pitfalls of that. They might wind up losing this game. But I think the general direction of the Canadiens, the belief in the market has grown significantly because no one could have expected them to come out of this road trip the way they did.
It's been quite the run in Montreal, Arpon. Always appreciate your time and the insight. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you, guys. Have a good one.
Montreal Canadiens were an option in our Dominion Lending Center's poll question. Is your mortgage up for renewal? Lock in the best rates by speaking with one of their mortgage experts over at dominionlending.ca. The question was, who would you bet on to make the playoffs out of these four teams? And the Twitter agrees with Frank, 53% saying the Ottawa Senators, 18% saying Pittsburgh, though, coming in second place. And what was interesting, Frank, if you go look at the replies, 3 replies, all of them in support of the Columbus Blue Jackets, who we didn't even include in the poll. Would you buy more on the Pens or the Blue Jackets? There's your question.
If I were to rank them, I would go Sens, Pens, Blue Jackets, Canadiens, Red Wings.
You're that low on the Wings.
I picked the Wings to finish 8th in the division, and I'm not convinced I'm going to be wrong.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. What do you make of this one from Big Willie? Is it harder to make the playoffs in the East or the West this year?
Definitely the West. The East, I was thinking about this as Arpon was talking. I think there's 6 really good teams, and then you've got a whole pile of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to say garbage, but you got a whole pile of stuff.
Yeah, a little mushy, I guess you could say. Let's move along to our daily bets for Bet365. Download the app today. Use the promo code NATION, whatever the moment. It's never ordinary at Bet365. They're the flavor of the day. It's the Montreal Canadiens. They are home dogs against the Vancouver Canucks. Vancouver is so banged up right now. You guys were laughing on the rundown. It was Derek Forbort and Vinny Desharnais playing on the power play the other day for them. They only have 3 wins in their last 10. Yes, the Canucks have been a good road team. The Habs are above 500 at the Bell Center, though. So I like them as home dogs tonight at plus 105. And one player prop, give me the Alex Ovechkin shot prop. Since returning to the lineup, he's only hit this mark in 3 of his 5, but still 3 of 5, 60% of the time. His last 2 games, he's combined for 11 shots on goal as well. I like Ovi to rack up the shots as the Caps take on the Buffalo Sabres. And to wrap things up, Frank, a little bit of garbage time in a clip that's making the rounds today from the KHL. A phone falling out of a player's pants mid-shift and the ref kind of going down the bench. Whose is it? And I can imagine, I forget the player's name. I'm blanking on it now. Nikita something. I'm imagining he was a little bit like, oh God, do I even admit that this is mine? Do I maybe just go and say no and buy a new phone after?
Look, I know this is 2025 and the conversation's probably different today, but could you imagine that happening if Mike Keenan was the coach? Pick another legendary hard-ass coach. I don't like unforgivable, honestly, unless like your wife or your girlfriend is like pregnant and due any minute and you're waiting for but that's when you hand your phone to the trainer and you say, hey, let me know if something happens. Short of that, I mean, I'd need to see the receipts on what he's texting about here in order to understand a little bit better.
Yeah, like you and I were talking before the show. Like, there's no way NHLers are even looking at their phones in the intermissions. Never mind.
I don't think so. I mean, I do think occasionally you're sneaking a peek. You might check something, but you're not like, no, you're focused. You're getting something to drink or a quick snack. You're fixing your gear. You're taping your stick, whatever it might be. Not that.
It reminds me, I used to play beer league with guys who they would be on call during games, but they'd still want to play. So you'd have their phone and a notepad on the bench. And if the phone was ringing, you'd be like, hey, you got to get off the ice. Your phone's ringing. You got to run off. Maybe he has a second job, Frank. Maybe he's on call. Don't want to miss anything.
Those are hard times in
Yeah.
the gulag.
That is a wrap on today's edition of the show. Shout out to Arpon Basu for swinging by. Tomorrow, Tuesday, exactly 2 months from the NHL trade deadline. And to celebrate the occasion, Frank's got an all-new trade targets. You won't want to miss it. Tomorrow, noon Eastern, right here on the Daily Faceoff YouTube. Until then, enjoy the hockey tonight and enjoy your Monday. What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you're going to want to hit the subscribe button to not miss any of our content. From daily live shows with Frank Saravalli to analysis from former NHLers to exclusive interviews with some of the biggest names in the hockey world on Frankly Speaking. You're going to want to hit that subscribe button and stay up to date with everything going on in the hockey world.